India's newly announced 800 million rare earth strategy, which was announced merely days ago, has arrived at the right moment, that of acute geopolitical and economic vulnerability. Earlier in January this year, the Indian government had launched the National Critical Minerals Mission, which is related with plans for large investments and regulatory reforms for REE, or the rare earth elements, crucial to position India as a meaningful player in the strategically vital and fast evolving sector. And yet, New Delhi's real challenge lies in converting ambition into time bound, technically credible, and internationally partnered modus operandi. China's imposition of export controls on seven rare earths and related magnets in April 2025 sent shockwaves throughout the globe. India's EV industry, which is overwhelmingly dependent on Chinese supplies for those magnets, saw an immediate hit. While Beijing has offered verbal assurances on these restrictions eventually being eased, no timeline has been given, and as of now, the controls remain in place. Every available metric, from EV production projections to renewable energy expansion to defense modernization and digital infrastructure, indicates that global demand for rare earths and permanent magnets will only increase. So, for an economy with India's aspirations in both security and industrial capabilities, and given our geopolitical tensions, diversifying the current dependence on REE and magnets is nothing short of existential. But first, let's understand a bit of a structural paradox with India's capabilities when it comes to rare earths. India holds the world's fifth largest rare earth reserves, approximately 6.9 million metric tons. But what it lacks is the capability to convert this into desirable industrial value in a globally competitive environment. At present, India does not possess the commercial scale facilities capable of refining, separating, and or processing the full spectrum of rare earth elements to high purity levels which are required for manufacturing magnets. And even if mining volumes can be expanded tomorrow, let's assume, we simply do not have the technical solutions or industrial scalability to process these elements domestically. The new REE policy, or the rare earth policy, acknowledges this gap and promises major investment flows and simplification of regulatory frameworks. But without international partnerships in technology, in expertise, and infrastructure, India risks repeating a decades long pattern where strategic development looks impressive on paper but fails to deliver substantive results. The classic overpromise but underdelivery paradox. Now, India is also late to the race. Most advanced economies began strengthening their REE supply chains almost a decade ago. Closer home, especially if you look at the Indo Pacific giants, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan have already built diversified partnerships with developing countries such as Brazil and Vietnam, to name a few, invested in recycling technology, formed industry consortiums, and embedded their respective REE strategies into national industrial policies. Their mixed but meaningful results offer India a cluster of practical lessons for determining further course. But before I turn to those lessons, it is important to understand the technical side of the rare earth challenge. And here, let me tell you the difference between rare earths and critical minerals. Rare earths are often equated with critical minerals, but they are a distinct subset of 17 elements classified as light, medium, and heavy. And this comes within the larger subset of what is usually referred to as the critical minerals. So, light rare earths like lanthanum and neodymium are common and vital for EV motors and magnets. Medium rare earths such as samarium and dysprosium support high temperature applications, while heavy rare earths like holmium, yttrium, and lutetium are scarce, costly, and essential for advanced defense and semiconductor systems. Now, their unique magnetic strength, thermal stability, and catalytic properties because of unpaired electrons, and I don't want to go into more details, but this is what collectively make them indispensable across modern technologies. So, rare earths are not geologically rare, but occur in dispersed forms, making processing capital intensive, polluting, and complex. And here we have to get to the China story because this dependency that you see on China has been in making for a decade. Rare earth deposits exist across the world, but China dominates the chain with 44 million tons of rare earth reserves, which is almost 48% of global exploitable reserves and 69.2% of global output. The United States, by comparison, has only 1.9 million tons. But what sets China apart is not just the quantity of the reserves, but 4 decades of deliberate industrial strategy, giving it an advantage others missed. The strategic value of rare earths emerged during the Cold War when US military research in the 1960s developed samarium cobalt magnets for radar systems and yttrium aluminium garnet lasers for missile guidance. But while the US pioneered early technology, China built the supply chain at a much cheaper price. In fact, Deng Xiaoping has famously said, if the Middle East has oil, China has rare earths. From the 1980s onwards, China directed state subsidies, relaxed environmental regulations, and put humongous investments into extraction, separation, and magnet making technologies. Between 1990 to 2000, which is a decade, China produced 73,000 metric tons of rare earths and expanded output by 450% as other countries curtailed their own production by 60% due to cost and environmental concerns. By 2009, China controlled 98% of global mine production. By 2010, 97% of global supply. Currently, China dominates 60 to 70% of the rare earth mining and over 90% of the rare earth supply. And to complicate things a bit further, the heavy rare earth elements, which are more difficult to extract and are far less abundant compared to the lighter ones, are concentrated almost exclusively in China. And this gives Beijing an unparalleled leverage. The first major weaponization of rare earths by China did not occur in 2025. It occurred before that, in 2010, when it halted the rare earth exports to Japan after an incident over the Senkaku Islands. Prices for several elements skyrocketed by up to 500%, forcing Tokyo to recalibrate its entire supply chain strategy, a turning point that fundamentally reshaped Japan's industrial policy. More recently, and now we come to present times, following the sharp escalation of US China trade tensions in 2025, triggered by the Trump's tariff wave, Beijing retaliated by tightening exports of 7 rare earth elements and magnets made from them. Now, here we have to look at what lessons India can learn from how other countries responded to China's dominance. To assess India's evolving strategy meaningfully, one must situate it against how other economies have adapted to China's dominance. Now, let's look at Japan because we are mentioning Japan. Now, shocked by China's 2010 incident over the Senkaku, Japan moved with speed and extremely sound strategy. Within months, Tokyo approved 100 billion yen or a $1.2 billion supplemental budget dedicated to rare earth security. Over the next decade, Japan was able to cut its dependence on China from what was once at 90% to about 60%. Japan also built domestic expertise in high-end magnet manufacturing, invested in cutting-edge research on alternative materials, and expanded recycling and developed global partnerships. Japan's experience is now regarded as one of the most consequential shifts in global critical mineral security. It shows that clear industrial policy, backed by sustained investment, can reshape global supply chains. Now look at the example of South Korea. South Korea has also moved in time. Recognizing its vulnerability in both rare earths and magnets, it has forged strong partnerships with countries like Vietnam and other ASEAN countries like Malaysia, beginning in 2025. With Vietnam particularly, cooperation on neodymium extraction and magnet production is particularly advanced. Beyond mining, Seoul is developing recycling technologies and working closely with Southeast Asian players, like I mentioned, to create a region-wide circular model for rare earth recovery. Now let's look at the case of Taiwan. For Taiwan, whose advanced semiconductor industry consumes large quantities of rare earths and the dependency risk on China is huge, geopolitical crisis notwithstanding about what is happening in the Taiwan Straits, this has been quite existential. Since 2002, Taiwan has promoted sustainable rare earth use and recycling infrastructure. In fact, today, Taiwan's strategy rests on about three, four pillars. First, geopolitical diversification. Majority of Taiwan's rare earth imports now do not come from China. They come from Europe, US, and Japan, marking a shift away from dependence on Beijing. Second, technological innovation in recycling. Taiwan is a global pioneer in what is referred to as urban mining, which means extracting rare earths from electronic waste, and that is why it is called recycling. Companies like Lianyu Metals now produce battery grade cobalt sulfate and sodium tungstate successfully. Third, strategic international partnerships. Now, this includes a 10-year agreement linking Taiwan, France, and Brazil. French firm Kerstar's SAS, supported by Taiwanese and Japanese partners, is helping Brazil extract heavy rare earths such as dysprosium and terbium, while Brazil benefits from value-added technical capabilities and emerges as a regional leader in its own theater. And fourth, related to the above, is the consortium based innovation ecosystems. These ensure that research breakthroughs translate quickly into commercial capabilities built on best practices, and of course, it leads to an expanded footprint as well. Now, let's talk about India's window then. India has shown potential interest in partnerships with Japanese and South Korean companies. In fact, in August this year, several media outlets reported that state owned IREL sought collaboration not just in magnet production but also in overseas mining projects across countries such as Argentina, Australia, Malawi, and Myanmar. These are promising directions, but promises alone will not deliver supply chains. To capitalize on its vast reserves and demands of a growing economy, India must pursue a blend of the following five plans. First, time bound implementation, not open ended intentions. Second, clarity on industrial sequencing, from mining to separation to refining and then magnet fabrication. Third, credible international partnerships leveraging the strengths of all that are included, which will not be achieved by promising bilateral talks only. Fourth, R&D pathways aligned with global innovation in recycling, substitutes, and efficiency. And fifth, environmentally responsible extraction techniques to draw more responsible stakeholders. Remember that China has led to a lot of global pollution because of its rare earth mining and extraction, etc. Like other advanced Indo Pacific economies, the key lesson here is that no country has built the REE resilience alone. Consortiums involving governments, industries, and research institutions, often spanning continents, have become the new norm. The Kerster France Brazil Taiwan arrangement, Japanese partnerships across Africa and Southeast Asia, and Korean Vietnamese ventures illustrate how the race for rare earth security is accelerating, powered by both geopolitical tension and industrial strategy. But there is a silver lining before I end. Harvard recently published a research paper on rare earth policy, and it was titled Trade and Industrial Policy in Supply Chains Directed Technological Change in Rare Earths. And they add an important insight. It says China's export restrictions, even though of course painful, have led many firms worldwide to innovate aggressively. In fact, they go into the details of how China's actions pushed the rest of the world to really come out with innovative solutions. The shock generated research on substitute materials, better recycling, and new processing techniques. The lesson to draw is the fittest survived by adaptation, led by timely innovation. So I'll be back to track the developments on India's rare earth pursuits. Stay tuned.